Welcome back to the last session. So we have our fourth session on advanced analytics. And this session will be chaired by Valerie van de Weert, and she is an MD, a doctor, also a scientist and physician at Janssen Clinical Innovation. So please, Valerie.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Ingrid. So I think I know some of you in the audience here today, but for the ones who don't know me, as Ingrid said, I'm Valerie van de Weert. I'm a medical doctor by training and now scientist-physician in Johnson & Johnson working on Project ATHENA. I'm a doctor by training, but my interest, like most of you here today, has always been in the intersection between medicine and data science. And that's why I'm very happy that I can introduce the speakers of the fourth session here today of Advanced Analytics in Health, because I truly think the opportunities for advanced analytics in health are immense. But of course, as was mentioned here today, to perform advanced analytics, we need data, and we need clean data. And it's been talked about a lot today, that it's very difficult to get the right data within the healthcare community. But I'm optimistic, and I believe that in the recent years, there have been a lot of investment going towards optimizing our health databases, exemplified by all the projects that were talked about here today. And I believe, maybe I'm a bit more optimistic than Michelle, but that there are already very valuable data sets available that we can use and that we can tap into. On top of that, there's a recent evolution in technological advancements, and these allow us to not only tap into those databases, but combine these databases and build data networks with the use of federated machine learning. And within these networks, machine learning can be leveraged to gain new scientific insights that can eventually assist our healthcare professionals and leads to improved quality of care. When we're looking at other industries, we can already see that machine learning and advanced analytics really create a huge impact and create a lot of benefits, and that they reach a high level of performance. Of course, within the healthcare industry, we're expecting a very, very high performance level and a very high level of accuracy. But I believe that for certain use cases, we are already able to reach that high performance level. But I think an important step that we must also focus on too is how do we implement these algorithms. A small example is in another project we've developed an algorithm that is able to detect the presence of a genetic mutation just by looking at the biopsy of a tumor of a patient, which is collected for almost every cancer patient. Of course, this is very valuable information because this can assist our physicians. This can give information if a patient is going to benefit from a treatment or if it's not. So it really helps the physicians. Now, this algorithm, within our research walls, it shows a high level of performance, very impressive high level of accuracy. But now it's a matter of how do we actually create impact with these technologies? How do we get it from outside our research walls actually to in the doctor's office and to actually make an impact? So I really think as a community, we also must work towards establishing a framework to seamlessly and trustworthy integrate these technologies within our healthcare system. And I think we need communication, collaboration between the healthcare community, between the tech community to actually reach this point. And I really believe because we can make an impact to get these impressive technologies that are already ready to help us out of the labs and into the clinical practice in the doctor's hands. I think this shift is very essential. But so far, my perspective, I think we have speakers who are way more experienced and they will share their insights. These speakers are actively contributing to making this a reality. And our first presentation will be led by Professor Yves Moreau. Professor Moreau is a professor of engineering at the University of Leuven in Belgium. His research focuses on the use of artificial intelligence to analyze DNA to better diagnose genetic diseases and on integrating complex genomic data for drug discovery. On top of that, his team focuses on developing algorithms and tools for big data analysis that respects privacy by design. He doesn't only have academic interests, he also is a tech innovator interested in identifying relevant business models for emerging technologies. He's co-founder of Dataforce, a data mining company specialized in fraud detection, and co-founder of Cartagena, specialized in IT solutions for clinical genetic diagnosis. Within Project ATHENA, Professor Moreau is Work Package 4 lead and bringing his expertise to implement our federated machine learning algorithm. And his presentation will be focused on the federated machine learning for the integration of clinical and omics data. So without further ado, Professor Moreau.
So what I want to do today is kind of reflect forward on some of the things that we have seen in the work we've done over the years. So it's Project Athena, but also a number of other projects. So about a decade ago, we introduced the idea of federated analytics in clinical genetics for rare genetic disorders. We built a platform now called WINGS. That was before the time of the GDPR, but the key concept emerged quite quickly. The data that we were looking at is quite sensitive. We want to actually leave the data at a data custodian and push the computation there. What we realized when we entered into the GDPR era, or it started to be clear that we were getting there, is that this was actually a very interesting tool to actually handle the constraints that come from the GDPR. And here I want to plead for our two colleagues who gave, Griet and Magali, who gave great presentations. I know this is lawyer speak, and I know it's painful. I experience it every day. But I want to plead for listening to what they said, that it's really important. We have to find realistic solutions. So we can't get stuck and say, well, we can't do anything. We have to find solutions. But let's listen to what has been said, because it's really key on building infrastructure that will help us work for the decades to come. And at some point, people like me, because I have other work than just my academic position, will come back and haunt you if you do something silly with your data. So a key principle in the data federation here is the idea that from your local data, you will create aggregate statistics. And that's a concept in the GDPR. And the idea is that if what you have is aggregate statistics, then it's not information about the individual participants. Therefore, at some point, it leaves the realm of the GDPR. And it was mentioned that, well, sometimes we think this could be like a run around the GDPR, and I think that's not at all what it should be. We have to realize that, yes, once the data is aggregated, and under some conditions I will come back to, we can say, well, actually, this data is not in personal data anymore, therefore we can do whatever we want with it. Well, this is a wrong interpretation in my view, because you have to get there. So to decide whether the processing of your data that is actually non-personal anymore is acceptable, you actually should have an idea what you're going to do with it, because otherwise you can't really judge. And I think there we have a bottleneck. If you say, I'm going to use this aggregate data to do something really, really silly, well, somebody will come back and say, well, you shouldn't have produced these aggregates in the first place, because that production of the data, that falls under the GDPR. Okay? So that's really important. I think in most settings, everybody is trying to do their best, but there are settings where people will try to do things that we feel icky about. And I was in the news about how the UK Biobank was sharing some of the data with insurance companies, individual level data, and I felt, that kind of hurts. And so we have to really think about what we want to achieve with the data and how we protect the interest of participants. In particular, this gives a model where processing only takes place after authorization by each data controller. So it also gives control to actually the custodians of the data to decide to which analysis they want to participate and what they don't want to participate in. Okay, so I think that federated analytics facilitates GDPR compliant. It's not, it's not because you're federated that you're GDPR compliant. That has been said before, but I want to stress that. I mean, the GDPR, in my view, and I'm not a lawyer, but it has this philosophy of, try to do the things right. And I kind of sensed that from reading it. And so if you try to follow, tick the boxes, but you still want to do something bad, it doesn't really quite work in the end. And there's this principle of data minimization. I think pseudonymization is a good tool for that. I think federation is also something that leads you into data minimization, because you're not exchanging patient-level data with other parties. It doesn't mean that it's the only thing that you can do. It doesn't mean that it's the only thing you should do. Now, there is one important caveat. So I would not be keen on actually building federated systems and then opening up them to the whole world and not knowing who's doing what with that data, because potentially there are attacks even on aggregate data. It's not obvious that, once you have computed the average weight of all the people in your population, that you actually can figure out who was in the population. But when you go to very rich data, for us it's been mainly genetic data, you can actually do attacks like membership attacks from loads of statistics. So if you produce lots and lots of analysis and you give access to all these analyses, you can, for example, if you have the data of a person, figure out whether they were in the data set. And you could say, well, you already have the data of that person, so what? But if that data set is labeled like schizophrenia, for example, then you're actually providing a very important piece of information about that person that I would not have just by collecting their raw DNA. So my plea is to actually carry out a case-specific risk analysis of your aggregation scheme every time. Things change, and you said, well, I've used that tool before, but now I want to do something different. Well, sit down and think about, are there risks? And again, it's very difficult to actually get to a situation where you avoid all risks. I think it's a balance, and my view is, rather than trying to ensure perfect security, we adopt an attitude that's much closer to the attitude of the IT community that will say, well, I know that firewalls, I can demonstrate mathematically that they are absolutely secure, but we have practices to actually deal with those problems. We do our best, and when we see that there is a weakness, we patch the weakness. Hopefully we can do it in a fairly rigorous manner and not have to patch every week. But basically this attitude that systems are pragmatic and practical and used, and then when there are weaknesses, we actually look at how to fix them. I think that's more the philosophy, rather than claiming that because we have this fantastic federated and encryption scheme, there are no risks anymore, and becoming blind to the risk that could emerge. At the moment, it's, some people have done other things, but a lot of the work we do is about horizontally partitioned data. You can be called horizontal, vertical, doesn't matter because you can switch, because it just means transposing your matrix. But basically, we have the same data about other patients at different participating centers, at different custodians, okay? It's the same data. And basically there we try to compute statistics, the example of Michiel on computing the average weight by summing the weights and counting the number of participants at each center. That was a really nice example. And of course you can do that for much more complex data. We can train deep learning neural networks on this type of architecture. There are also a number of other scenarios that are less explored and are probably more challenging to do properly, where we say, well, actually different parties hold different data about the same people. Okay, and that's what I call then vertically partitioned data. And so there, we still, at least I and my team, we still don't know very well how to handle such cases, because there, you want to link somehow the patients across the different centers, and so how to prevent the crosstalk of information will be significantly harder. But that's a very interesting scenario because, well, if I'm a hospital, maybe, the Social Security has some really interesting information that I would want to leverage. Maybe a registry has some information that I'm very interested in. But how do we do that safely? I think that's still a big area that we want to visit. To give a bit an idea of what we can do, and this is work that was done, led by Lisbeth Peters in Hasselt, and a contribution from her team and from Ashkan, who's somewhere in the room, I think, there, about COVID and multiple sclerosis. The MS Data Alliance is an international network of registries that collect information about multiple sclerosis patient clinical data mostly. And during COVID, there was a big question, well, those patients, they get treatments that are immunomodulators. And so if they get infected with COVID, the outcome might be actually quite bad. So is there a difference between the different treatments that are available for MS in terms of the complications that will emerge if those patients get COVID? This is a tough question because those patients, they know that they are at risk when they present an infection, so they tend to be quite careful and try to avoid getting infected with COVID because they know that something wrong might happen. And so it was really essential to look across the world to collect all that data. And essentially from that, although this outcome was not extremely surprising, it was possible to show that for some treatments that have indeed strong immunomodulating effects, that actually complications of COVID in those MS patients receiving those treatments were getting more severe. Okay? And by doing the statistics across the world, we could actually achieve statistical power, and that actually led into recommendations. So this is a bit incorporated into the standard of care of MS patients for COVID. Of course, now COVID has evolved, but at that time, I think there was a really important contribution. Again, it's an observational study, so I'm always careful. Well, this is not a clinical trial, so how close is that to the reality? Well, this is the best we could do. I don't think anyone did better than that, but still, be a little careful about the conclusions that you draw. One theme that emerged, and that's the research of Ashkan and some other, is that actually it's not enough to be able to do advanced statistics or even fancy machine learning. We have really nice tools to do deep learning, for example, but that we talked a lot about the preparation of the data, which is absolutely crucial. I teach my students garbage in, garbage out. That will never go away. But actually, even in the machine learning task, it's nice to have a script to run a deep learning algorithm, but there's actually a lot of different modalities and also a lot of different roles in those analyses. So we would need to have, at some point, the tools to be able to allow federated learning for everyone, so that they are, the data providers, the data scientists, the downstream users, they all can come together and look at the same data and the same platform in different ways because they have different roles. And so, of course, we'd like to have one, package that we just get and has all the functionalities we want. I think we're still very far from it. So I think for a couple of years, we'll have to live with a complex ecosystem where different players will start building things. Hopefully, we'll make things open source, and then we can build further on top of that, so that eventually we have the building blocks to actually address projects faster. I think the idea of, we just have one piece of software like Excel, and then it does everything for you, well, that's probably not there anytime soon, but more a toolbox of elements that can be quickly configured to support a project and go from those trajectories that are currently measured in years to trajectories that are measured in a limited number of months. That would already be a fantastic achievement. And so that's a platform that Ashkan and others are currently developing. I'll skip that too. And so that type of infrastructure was built in actually the COVID pilot projects to actually support all the elements of these type of analyses. Now, another thing, and this was mentioned several times, but I want to give a little spin on that, is the question of data heterogeneity. So when you look at the data across the world, you don't always see the same thing. And statisticians are very well aware of that. So a good epidemiologist will know that. That's absolutely routine and banal. In machine learning, we still, we know that, but we don't always behave according to the knowledge that we are supposed to have. So we tend to think, well, we'll just put more data on the heap, and eventually everything will sort itself. And that's just not going to happen, so we have to be careful. And I want to give a few examples. That's from MS-based, or a collation of data, centralized data, but it's very reflecting of the situations that we face. So that's actually the different custodians participating in creating a bigger data sets. And what you will see is that, well, there are some big players and then medium players and lots of small players. Okay? For statistics, this is actually quite bad. It's really not what you want. You'd say, I have 10 partners, they each contribute the same amount of data, therefore things will average out. when a partner contributes 20% and then a whole bunch of the other ones contribute a fraction of a percent, well, that's not good for statistics, okay? And if it's not good for statistics, it's not good for machine learning, okay? There's no runaround. Same thing here, class imbalance. You know, if you have positive and negative cases, that might vary from one center to the other. There it's per country. I only had access to the data per country. The previous one was per hospital. Okay, it doesn't matter. You know, it's just to illustrate that the proportion of positive and negative case can vary widely. Okay, which means, I mean, from a statistical perspective, this is a very significant difference. When you have to tell whether someone is affected by a certain disease or not, the prevalence, the prior probability does matter. Okay? So we need to incorporate that in our design, not only of statistical methods, where if you find a good statistician, a good epidemiologist, they will deal with that properly, but also in machine learning. I think that part is kind of still a bit harder. So I've been pleading for a bit of a twist on the current model, which is to say we have data from all across the world, and then we imagine that there is an underlying reality of how that data behaves. There are the healthy patients and there are the diseased patients, and they each behave in one way. Okay, and I think this is a mistake, that there are actually differences if you go across country, across healthcare system, across many different things. And actually, in the long run, I think we want models that do predictions at the custodian level. You know, I don't care to have the best model on average over the world. I will want to have a model for me that for my patients gives the best possible decisions. And I think that part has not been looked at in depth yet. And so here, this is a graph of performance area under the curve, precision recall curve, of fine-tuning. So you first learn together a global model, and then you try to fine-tune it on your own data. And then we see that actually the performance that is the stars that are the fine-tuned models, they tend to be higher than actually a global model that is the same for everyone. I think that's a very important research direction, and I think that hasn't been studied well enough. You know, if you have a way, because of characteristics of your own population, to make your decision differently. I mean, it's easy for genetic disorders, okay? You take the rare genetic disorders, there are some populations that are more affected. And so if you were to say the same symptoms in a certain population, you would say, well, the chance that this disease is much higher than if I see the same symptom in another population where that disease is much rarer. Okay, so Tay-Sachs is a good example. There are communities that are much more severely affected, and yes, the same weird symptoms would lead you to much closer to the right conclusion if you knew what the background was. And so basically this is the same kind of data about how different methods, so I will not go in details because I don't have that much time, but different methods will allow you to actually average data, combine data to try to obtain optimal performance. Better performance over a network, better fine-tuned models come at a cost, so the better models are also the more expensive ones. And there's expensive in terms of calculation and expenses in terms of computation. And then we realize now that when you have to send all that data back all the time, there might be bottlenecks in your hub if you have lots of data or lots of participating centers. So there might be a trade-off that we need to realize there. And the last thing is that I think we have to go for new collaborative models and new value propositions. What are we going to do with all that data? I'm going to skip a couple slides. To get to the conclusion. Basically, what does that mean? Currently, it's very research-oriented. You know, I'm a scientist. I work with a couple colleagues across the world. But actually, we want to know how to scale that up. If we need to scale that up, we need to actually make sure that there is money to do that. It's not only going to come from research funding. So we need to actually be able to work with other entities like public health authorities, like pharma companies to organize actually the support of such infrastructure on a much larger scale. Now we can do the small pilots, but in a decade, 2 decades, we'll have much bigger infrastructure. It will need to be financed, and we need to think about ways to actually keep the control at the data custodian level, but at the same time enable other types of analysis. And with that, I want to conclude. I want to thank all the people in my team and other teams that have contributed one way or another to this type of research. There are many more names than I could put on the slides. And thank you very much for your attention.
So I'll quickly introduce the next speaker. It's Truls. I just spoke to him and asked the right pronunciation, so I'm hoping I'm saying it correctly. Truls Bierman Mortensen. Truls is a 25 years experienced entrepreneur, focusing his activities on life science startups in biotech, medtech, and healthcare IT, and providing strategy consulting, government service, and international development. He is currently the founder and CEO of DataFair, a Danish startup focused on offering epidemiological and health economic analysis based on health data, and developing the Oscar platform for accessing health data based on the GDPR principles of privacy and security by design. Today, Truls will present us the Oscar project, providing the Danish perspective on use of health data in partnerships of private companies and public organizations. So, welcome, Truls.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all of you for being here. I know it's been a long day and we're approaching a cocktail hour, which I think has been well deserved. Also, thank you for inviting me, because I think what you've achieved here in the ATHENA project is actually really interesting. And I'm somebody who can appreciate it, because I've been trying to do something of the same in Denmark, which I will tell you a little bit about. So when you presented me as an entrepreneur, that's another way of saying I'm not a clinician, I'm not a researcher, I'm not a data scientist, I'm not a computer scientist. So what am I doing here? I'm basically standing here because I think what you call a bumblebee, somebody who doesn't realize that what he's trying to do may not fly. And that's how it is if you're trying to take the challenge that Professor Moreau just presented, saying, if you want to take some of the things we heard about today, providing better access to data for different stakeholders, if you want to do that and do it at scale. Now, we're trying to address two challenges in the Oscar project. The one is what Ulrik Lassen here says. Ulrik is an oncologist at Copenhagen University Hospital, and I'm working closely with him. And he's saying, we offer standardized treatment for a range of cancers, but we actually do not know how well they work and for whom. So this is the best hospital in Denmark, specialized in oncology. And Ulrik is very ambitious in terms of offering personalized medicine and being data-driven. And he says, I don't know how my patients do. And that's even when they're just getting the standard treatment protocols that we have in Denmark, where you're guaranteed a treatment after 3 months. But he wants to offer personalized treatment. This is 2022, it's the same today. 20 years ago, we said in Denmark, we want today's patient and the information about today's patient to benefit next year's patient. 20 years later, we are still not there. So this is the key challenge. How can we actually use data to offer better treatment for patients? The other challenge was the fact that, and that was the Danish Innovation Fund that contacted my company, because they said we've spent 20 years financing projects within health data. I mean, to push innovation, etc. But at best, the projects succeed. And then when the project is a success, then it's closed down and there's very little that stands afterwards. Now, if we were to actually invest in a project, not just spend money, but invest in a project, how should we go about it so that it actually can continue after the project has been closed down? How can we make it sustainable? And that was the challenge we took on, and that's why it's called Oscar. And it's very prominent. Oscar, it stands for One-Stop Shop for Clinical Research, which is where most people in public administration and most of the clinicians in the public sector and scientists get a little bit uncomfortable with the word shop. But shop is really about one thing. It's about how can we find alternative sources to financing something that's difficult to get the funding from if you go to your local government. So, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what is Oscar, what we have learned so far, and my idea in how we may be able to succeed. So what is Oscar? It's really a national platform for secure, confidential sharing of health data, developed in partnership with the biggest data owners in Denmark. It's a platform that will be operated by an organization. Right now it's being developed by the project, but this project will merge and become an organization, so that's sort of a permanent governance structure before the project has been finished. And the idea is that it'll operate on commercial principle. It will market insight and analysis, so we will offer insight and analysis, not the data set in itself, but access to work on the data set. We will try to sell the services, the insight, on a principle of value-based pricing, because sometimes the price you can take as a public hospital is a lot lower than the value to your customer, because you may perhaps only be able to price your involvement in a project or in a study as the cost plus. But what if cost plus is 10,000 euro, but the value to the customer is 80,000 euro? Now that difference is money that you could actually somehow funnel into this system and finance it. And so if we can generate a profit, we want to send the profit back so we can fund the kind of clinical research that most clinicians are saying, I wish you would be interested in doing this, but I cannot get any pharmaceutical companies to pay for it, and it's not high on the priority of the government or whoever is running the hospital. So all that research that's really relevant to clinicians and to patients, but where funding is limited. So data, or OSCAR, is what? It's about new data collection. And I'll give you a word in a couple of seconds on what is the old data collection in Denmark. It's about new data collection. We are creating a cohort with cancer, lung cancer and breast cancer patients, about 2,000 patients that are being enrolled in a prospective non-intervention study. We are collecting all the electronic medical record data. We are collecting patient-reported outcome data. We are combining that data with socioeconomic data from Statistics Denmark. And then we are also generating genome data on all the patients. So they're being fully genome sequenced before the treatment starts. So we'll have a very rich, very deep cohort of data on cancer patients. That's the new data collection. It's a new technology. I think it addresses some of the issues, or we try to address some of the issues that Professor Moreau was talking about. How do you combine data from different data sources on the same patient? So we're using a different technology than what you've heard about today. It's called multi-party computation. I'll get back to that in a second. We're looking at new use cases. I don't think anything new compared to what we heard about today, but it's everything from prevalence analysis. So a simple, fast answer to the question, how many patients have this kind of disease and are receiving this treatment? Because that question, which should be simple, well, the question is simple, but the answer is actually not simple. You would want to be able to get an answer to that question in minutes. As we've heard some tell today, it might be possible. It's about new collaboration, so the public and the private sector working closely together, new business model, and it's also about new regulation, because this project has been designed so that we know we're going to hit the wall with our head. We know we're going to get to the point where we want to do things that you cannot do with the current regulation. Not necessarily because of GDPR, but because of the way it's being interpreted in Denmark, and because the specific rules that apply in Denmark within GDPR, and also in areas that are not regulated by GDPR. So I promised you a few words on data in Denmark. We have very good health data in Denmark. It's very good because it covers the entire population, so almost 6 million people. We have, and these data are being collected in national registries, so we have more than 114 national registries covering the entire population. Some of these registries go more than 40 years back. Every single data point in these registries is linked to a unique identifier, which is the social security number. So, and we of course use electronic medical records in all the hospitals. We have a penetration, and the same do the GPs, and even the care sector, which is take the responsibility of the municipalities in Denmark, are also increasingly using electronic care journals. And there's a high trust in Denmark, so the Danes, they really trust their government and each other, and therefore they also are quite willing to have their data be used. A most recent survey showed that two important data points. 85% of all Danes would like their data to be used for research. First data point. Second data point, 85% of Danish citizens expect their data to be used for research. And that's what we cannot deliver right now. So we have very good data, and I talked to some of those people present here today and said, I wish I could get access to to Danish data. And I can say, well, so do I. We're sitting on very good data in Denmark, so how about we get our asses off the chair? That could be a t-shirt, you know, front and back. So what do we want to do with this data? Well, the technology that we are testing in the OSCAR project is called secure multi-party computation. The idea is basically to take information out of data, and then you analyze data without information, and that is actually doable. So what I'm showing you here is DST stands for Statistics Denmark, so that's the Statistical Bureau, and SDS is the National Health Data Agency. They're the ones who are responsible for 114 national registries. We would like to combine data from those two. Imagine the kind of health economic analysis you can make on a patient if you're considering giving reimbursement to a very expensive, hopefully very efficacious new cancer treatment. But if you're going to pay 70,000 euro per year for such a treatment, you want to make sure you have a solid health economic case to support it. And if you can combine the clinical data with data from Statistics Denmark about people's work pattern, what kind of social services they're putting down, etc., then you can potentially come up with a much clearer result of such an analysis. So that's what we're trying to do here. And what it takes is that we install a server with each of these organizations. And those two servers will split every single data point. So that means if my age is going to be pulled out from the Statistics Denmark, it's 55, then what leaves the firewall are two values. One is perhaps 60, and the other one is -5. The sum of the two is going to be 55. But the value of 55 is known nowhere in the system. There's no anonymization list. The one server is actually the key to the other server. So we have a system that from a security perspective is as safe as any of the individual data organizations, at the very least. And so we can perform analysis, but as we also heard with today, the presentation on federated learning, it's important that data is structured well, because once data is encrypted, that's essentially what we do with MPC, multi-party computation, you have no visibility on the values inherent in that data. So you need to structure data to those services that you want to build on top of your data access. And so what are those services? Well, we have developed or identified 20 different services so far that we think we could offer based on access to Danish data. Here they are sort of depicted so you can see them in relation to a product development process, from discovery and R&D, clinical, all the way to approval and post-marketing. And again, this reflects some of the presentations that you heard earlier on today. We are right now focused on two services. One is the prevalence and patient journey, being able to give an answer to the question, a quick, precise answer to the question, how many patients are there of ... And the other thing we want to do is to offer a data model for performance-based innovative pricing. We have a publication that hopefully will come out soon that shows that you can use one of the national registries, the Danish Patient Registry. You can use the data in that to basically support an agreement between a pharmaceutical company and then the insurance company saying, we will only pay for those cancer patients who are alive after 2 years. If you claim that your study has shown that you can give increased survival of 2 years. So if they are dead after 1 year and 11 months, you will not get paid. We have the data that can support that kind of agreement now. And have you shown that? Have you shown the potential savings from for the healthcare sector and the potential benefit from the pharmaceutical company, which is that they can still keep a high price point, right? So they will still get the high price, but they only get paid the high price if it works. So those are the two areas that we are focused on right now. I'm hopefully getting a new application through, and that means that service number 9, the artificial standard of care arm, is something that we'll also be able to test. So basically mean that your control arm is not going to be patients that are going to be recruited in a phase 2 or phase 3 trial. It's going to be data that we pull from electronic medical records. It'll make it cheaper and it'll make it faster. And I think there's also ethical arguments for doing that. So, the Oscar project, how did we get to where we are right now? I think we've taken an approach where we really want to work closely with as many people as possible. So in this case, we have most of the public data responsible organizations, Statistics Denmark, Danish Health Data Authority, National Genome Center, etc., etc., etc. And then we've also included a lot of the private pharmaceutical companies that do clinical research in Denmark. And it's the group of these two, they are the advisory board, they're the ones who've given us input to what are their needs, what kind of analysis, what kind of insight do they need. And so, the Oscar project, we talked about work packages today in the ATHENA project. I'm showing this, and actually what I would like to I think to focus on is under the regulatory and data access, because so we're implementing this project. That's fine. We know we're going to hit limitations on what we can do legally as things currently stand. Some of the limitations are just the fact that it's so slow because there's a lot of uncertainty about following the new rules, GDPR, still, 5 years after implementation. Others are sort of more hard barriers. So apart from implementing the project, we've also raised an initiative called We Are Not Waiting. And We Are Not Waiting is basically 4 seminars that we've held this year. And we're finishing it off with a political roundtable at Parliament in December. And We're Not Waiting, and I've stolen it from the hacker movement that some of you may be aware of in diabetes. But We're Not Waiting is basically everybody who wants to do something with data, who doesn't just want to sit down, but actually wants to make a difference. They are joining in a self-organized group and organizing seminars, identifying the key challenges and the key opportunities and a solution for overcoming barriers, and then taking it to the politicians. So how do we succeed? Well, we have to work closely with the large data owners, and that is slow. It takes a long time. It's great to have this data, but these organizations are really slow. And ministry, the Danish Statistical Bureau and the Health Data Authority are 2 different ministries, which makes it quite difficult for them because they've never worked together before. But you need to work with these large data owners. You need to take the time. You need to be patient and persistent. Then you need to work on adjusting regulation. And we've just changed the laws in Denmark. We came from a principle of every single use of data in the healthcare sector had to be based on explicit consent from citizens. We did that in 1998, and then we actually had a lot of exceptions from the start. But now we are changing it, so if you want to reuse data for another analysis, you don't have to ask for consent again, even if the data was initially collected with explicit consent in front of a doctor. You can just inform the patients, and then they have the option of doing opt-out. So you need to adjust the regulation. We are now pushing for a complete rewrite of the Danish health laws. We should also see a project like Oscar as a way of, it's important not to be perceived by the government as something that stands in the way of their ambitions that may be bigger than yours, but rather say this is an opportunity to test key elements of a national infrastructure. And then you should try to build coalitions and try to get them under different banners. We have focused on We Are Not Waiting in this case. Now, what are the lessons learned for Europe? And then I'm done. The technology, I think, is ready. We've heard distributed learning today. It's one. Another possibility is multi-party computation. And I'll be very happy to go into dialogue with those of you who are interested in this. I think a third possibility for technology is basically exporting microdata, but anonymized microdata using those technologies. There's also a way of aggregating data. So the technology is there. You should recognize that the public and the private sector have shared needs, and built on those shared values and the ability to reuse the same data. Strong public and private support is key. And don't estimate the time and the resources required for this to happen. I've been doing this for 4 years. I'm 55. I do expect this probably to be my last venture. And just for your information, retirement age in Denmark is now 69. And we'll probably be 73 by the time I'm 73. So, and then really essentially focus on the benefits for the patients. And then go narrow and deep before scaling, whether it's in part of Belgium, whether it's all of Denmark, whether it's in Europe. Identify those use cases where there's a real clear need, where you, with the least effort, can show the biggest benefit. Because I think that's what is needed to get the ball rolling. Thank you.